Good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you. And for the first few nights, we talked about just pausing. And when you pause, you have this chance, based on your posture, to really encounter God's presence. And I love those three words: pause, posture, presence. But if you're like me, whenever you spend time in God's presence, you're often reminded of your purpose. And today I want to talk about purpose. I think, and this is just me, I believe this wholeheartedly, that every single one of you in this room has been given a divine purpose, a unique role to play. Every one of you bears God's image, which means I have something to learn about God through you, through the way that you live your life, through the way that you put your gifts on display. And today I want to introduce you. Many of you know this character. His name is Simon in the scriptures. But Simon was a talmidim, which is Hebrew for apprentice, disciple, a student of a rabbi. And this man, Simon, was this student of Jesus. And one day Jesus does something that Jewish boys and girls would never go. He takes them to a place called Caesarea Philippi. And no Jewish boy, no Jewish girl, no good following rabbi talmidim would ever go to Caesarea Philippi. And here's why. Because every other year, 250,000 people would come to Caesarea Philippi. And inside Caesarea Philippi, there were all of these pagan temples. And when these 250,000 people would gather, they would gather at the base of this massive rock. And this rock had a hole in it, where it basically had this river flowing into this massive rock. You can Google it, you can see it. And what many people believed was that was the gate to the underworld. And there was a whole religion that was started based on this false god named Pan, who was like half goat and half man. And 250,000 people would gather here to worship this pagan god. And so Jesus says, hey, disciples, come with me. And they have no idea where they're going, but they're gonna walk 17 some miles to Caesarea Philippi. And as they're walking, Jesus says, what about you? Who do you say I am? He'd asked them all, like, who do people say I am? And people had said, I think you're like Elijah. People have said that. People have like said you're like one of the prophets of the Old Testament. But Jesus looks at Simon, and he looks at Simon and says, but what about you? Who do you say I am? And look how it responds. Simon Peter answered. He said, you are the Messiah, which is literally the word means anointed one. Or the way that we describe it in our language is, you are the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, the Son of the living God. And then look what Jesus replies. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter. He gives him like a new name in this moment, just because he answered the question, who do you say I am? And he says, you're the Messiah, you're the Christ, you're the anointed one, the Son of the living God. And he's like, so good on you, Simon. But here's the deal, you're no longer named Simon, you're named Peter. And Peter's name literally means rock. So he gives him the name Rocky right there, which is awesome. And then he says this, and on this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And I love this because what's so incredible to me about this is when you think about what is happening here is Jesus is saying, hey, Rocky, on this rock, I'm gonna build my church. And most people have thought, oh, he's building the church on Peter. But if you actually go to Caesarea Philippi and you actually see this massive, massive rock, and you see all of these pagan temples, it's as if Jesus is saying, what I wanna do is I wanna build my church there because they need it. They need to understand what grace and peace is all about. They need to understand what it means to have access to the Father. They need to know what the kingdom of God is all about. And it's in this moment where Peter, who has been given this new name, discovers his divine purpose, which is to build the church in the midst of culture. But I don't know about you. When you start to live your life, you might have a sense of what your unique divine purpose is. But then life comes at you. You find yourself getting tempted. And this is exactly what happens to Peter. I mean, he has this divine purpose, and then all of a sudden, he walks out on water. Many of you know the story. And he's walking on water because he wants to follow his rabbi. And then he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he sinks. And he has this moment where he's just like recognizes how easy it is to take your eyes off of Jesus. Even after this moment where he's given this new name, Jesus tells the disciples what's gonna happen to him. And Peter looks at Jesus and goes, never, Lord, never, Lord. And then in this moment, Jesus has to rebuke Peter. And so you have this moment where Peter has been given this divine purpose. He gets rebuked. He drowns, sort of, sinks in the water. He has a moment where Jesus is going through a really, really difficult time. And so Jesus gathers Peter and two other disciples to go to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray because Jesus knows what's coming. And so he brings his three closest disciples. And what happens? They all fall asleep. And Jesus goes, what are you guys doing? And they kind of like wake up, and then Jesus returns, and he's just feeling the weight of all of humanity's sin on his shoulders. And he looks over, and Peter's sleeping. He said, Peter, come on. And it happens 3 times. And if you think about that, like here's a guy who's the church is gonna be built on in the midst of culture. He has a divine purpose, but he takes his eyes off of Jesus. He gets rebuked by Jesus. He can't even stay up praying. And then when Jesus gets arrested, what does Peter do? He takes out of a sword and cuts off one of the soldier's ears. And Jesus is like, number one, where did you get that knife? And like, number 2, what are you doing? That is not what my kingdom is all about. And then Jesus does something to the dude's ear, and it comes back. But he has this moment where I'm gonna build my church on you, and you got a knife and sword and you're cutting off ears? What are you doing, man? And then you find Peter coming into contact with people who they can tell by the way he talks that he's from a part of Israel. And they know that this man, Peter, he was one of the Talmudim. He was one of the disciples. And Peter says, no, I'm not. One time, and then another time he says, I don't even know that man. And someone was like, I saw you with him. No, you did not, you're a liar. And so now you have Peter, who has this divine purpose from God to build the church in the midst of very, very uncertain culture. But he's someone who's taken his eyes off of Jesus, began to sink. He was someone who was rebuked by Jesus. He was someone who fell asleep praying with Jesus. He was someone who was carrying a knife and just cut off the ear of some dude. And he was someone who denied Jesus. And there's something really human about this to me. Because like I said, every single one of you in this room, you have a unique divine purpose. I don't know about you, but I don't like running. I just don't. I know that there's some of you who are like probably do cross country. You clap. But I had a buddy of mine many years ago, and he was like, hey, do you want to run a 5K with me and my family? I was like, no, bro, that sounds terrible. And he's like, no, you don't understand. Like, we run this race in our city, and then like we go to my parents' house after, and then later that night, my parents take us out for this amazing steak dinner. And I just wanted to invite you. And I was like, steak? I'll run for steak. So a couple weeks later, I end up waking up early, and I put on some shorts and shoes, and I drive like 90 minutes to this city that I'd never been to. And when I park my car, which was a station wagon, which was awesome, and I walk up, and there's like thousands of people, and I see my buddy, I meet his family, and then I see this whole list of porta potties, and so I'm like, I probably should use that before I run. And so I'm coming out of the porta potty when all of a sudden I'm being like ushered to the starting line. And I should have known, because like people have very short shorts and shoes that I don't even know how to say, like Saucony or Hoka, you know, like I had no idea what I was doing. And all of a sudden I hear like over the speakers, all right, runners, here we go, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And so I just start running. And I don't know where my friend is, because I've just been herded up to the starting line, but I'm like, I'll find him. So I'm just like running, and I'm looking for him. I'm looking behind me. I'm running, and I feel like I've been running a long time, and a little bit bitter because there's like a 78-year-old man ahead of me. And so finally I'm like out of breath. I'm like, hey man, I feel like we've been running a long time. How much farther do we got? And he's all chipper, which already makes me a little bitter. And he looks at his watch and he goes, hey there, brother. We just hit the 5-mile mark. We got 8.1 to go. And I said, I thought this was a 5K. And he says, you're in the wrong race, dude. And all of a sudden I was like, did my friend get his entire family to punk me and get me to run a half marathon? And then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm gonna finish this dumb race. And I'm like sort of running and like sort of walking, and this like lady like who has a fanny pack is just like moving by me. And she does this, no joke, she's like moving. And then she looks at me and she goes, you don't look good. And I was like, you don't either, but I'm not gonna say that. But she's like this, just walking. And then this is what she does, no joke. She opens up her fanny pack and pulls out a squished peanut butter sandwich. And she goes, I think you need this. And I was like, this is gross and sick. And yes, I do. I finally like keep running. I can't feel my thighs. I have no salt in my body. And then like I see the finish line, and I see my buddy, and I'm like sort of like running towards him, but diagonal. And I cross that finish line, and my buddy looks at me and goes, dude, you ran the wrong race. And if you want to know what sin looked like, you just needed to be in my head. I was like, bro, I know, because I can't feel anything in my body. The next morning I got up. I didn't even want to enjoy the steak. I couldn't. I just went home. I woke up the next morning. I couldn't even walk forwards. It hurt so bad. I just started walking backwards like moonwalk. But I find myself like journaling. And as I'm journaling, I feel as if the Lord has this moment with me. I don't know if you ever experienced this, but again, when you pause and you're in a posture and you enter into the presence of God, God's gonna remind you of your purpose, and God's gonna remind you of who you actually are. And in this moment, I had like this sense that I was about to meet God. And I'm just kind of journaling what I'm feeling. And I feel as if I'm like walking towards the gates of heaven. And it's so bright. It's like just like these lights. They're just so bright. And I can't even keep my eyes open because it's so bright. And this bright light is just getting closer and closer and closer. And it's warm. I can feel it. I can feel like the warmth off of this light. And as I get closer and closer, I realize, oh my gosh, I'm like in the presence of God. And I'm like just journaling this. And then all of a sudden I open my eyes and God looks at me and says, dude, you're running the wrong race. And all of a sudden it dawned on me. So much of my life was just trying to run the race that everybody else thought I should do. I think some of you might relate to that. Some of you have really no idea what God has in store for you, but you feel the pressure maybe from your parents, the pressure from another sibling, the expectations that maybe somebody else has put on to you, the shame that somebody's given to you, the judgment that someone has handed to you. And some of us have even felt it like Peter does with the choices that we've made, that we're thinking to ourselves, God could never use me. God could never actually do anything great with me. And what I think stalls so many sincere Christ followers from actually stepping out and being the full person that God intended them to be is they've let other people's lies, other people's pain, your own personal choices, decisions that you've made, failures that you've had, to speak louder than God's divine purpose for you. And I need you to understand this, that every single one of you has a unique race to run. I don't know if any of you like snowboarding. I love to snowboard. I grew up in California, and we'd always go up to this place called Mammoth Mountain or Big Bear, and we end up just loving to snowboard. And some of you who snowboard, you know this. You can go down like all of the hills and the slopes where everybody else goes, and it's fun. It's great. But then there's something called backcountry. Yeah, and what's amazing is at Mammoth, you'll take like 4 of these massive trolleys up to the top, these lifts. And I'll remember like it was like fresh powder that had just dropped the night before. The sun was up. And I'm like sitting kind of overlooking this vista. And I think I'm alone. And I just like scream out as loud as I can, how could anyone not believe in you, Lord? And then all of a sudden I hear this guy go, oh, I know, bro. And he just charges down the mountain. And I was like, wow. But I remember then from that vista going back country, it was like fresh powder. And I was just going through these trees and I was just going around and I was like almost creating my own path, and I could kind of see where I needed to go to get down the hill. I looked back and there was another guy behind me, but he was going a different way. I saw another person going another way. And all of a sudden I began to realize this is like each of us has this unique race to run. Or maybe for some of you, you're just running somebody else's race. And maybe some of you are just trying to compare yourself to the other people in your youth group, other people on your team, other people in your class. And it's clouding your ability to discover your unique purpose. But how do you find your unique purpose? I just want to give you 3 quick ways to discover it. First one is you have to look for the sign. And this comes from a man by the name of Marcus Buckingham. And he says that if you're going to discover your unique purpose, you got to actually look at what S you find success in. If you don't find success in actually putting this purpose on display, it's probably not the sign that this is your unique gift, and that it's probably just a hobby. Like, I love ping pong, but I lose a lot in ping pong. That is not my unique destiny. It is a hobby, all right? So it's different. But the I The I is like, it comes instinctive to you. Like you figure it out. Like my cousin, like ever since he was young, he could take a lawnmower apart, put it back together, it'd be missing 7 parts and it would run way better. He understood form and function. He loved going to Home Depot. It gives me anxiety, but like he loves it. He gets it. And it just came instinctive to him, and it doesn't come instinctive to me. G, when you do it, something inside you grows emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You lose track of time when you're doing this. And N, it fills a great need in our world. And that's the unique purpose. When you're running your unique race, man, you're gonna find success. And it's not gonna be easy, but you're gonna find success. It's gonna be instinctive, you're gonna grow, and it's gonna meet a deep need in our world. That's one way. The second way, though, is a little bit different. And I know not every one of you in this room has had an easy life. Some of you have experienced abandonment, neglect, abuse. Some of you maybe have gone through your parents divorcing. Maybe for some of you, like me, I didn't know my biological father. Maybe you don't know one of your parents. And maybe you're like me, you were adopted. And this kind of creates some sense of discontent, struggle. And that suffering that you're walking through, for some of you, it's been around anxiety or worry, mental health. That suffering that you are walking through, if you can trust the Lord in that, what ends up happening is, as one person calls it, a holy discontent, where now you, whenever you see this in the world, or whenever you see this in a person, you're like, I want to do something about that. When you saw the refugee crisis, maybe for some of you, you're like, I want to do something about that. And all of a sudden, I think one of the ways at which we find our unique calling is sometimes we get mad at the way the world is, and we want to do something to make it right. Maybe for some of you, you're seeing stuff in our world, you're like, the racism or the injustice, or people not knowing God. Man, it breaks your heart, and you're like, I want to do something about that. It's a way for you to discover your holy discontent, your unique purpose. A third way, after you found the sign or the holy discontent, a third way is you literally discovering your unique spiritual gift. And what's amazing is I didn't even know I had one. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. The reason I became a Christian was 2 juniors in high school took me under their wing when I was in 7th grade. Their names were Dominic and Nathan, but they went by the name Dominate, which is just awesome. And Dominic came up to me one day and said, hey, Carter, do you want to learn how to dominate life? It was the greatest question anybody ever asked me. For the next 6 months, they discipled me. And then all of a sudden, they spoke words over me, just like Jesus spoke words over Peter. And some of you see younger people in your youth group, and you have the power to speak a word into them. And when you encourage someone, here's what you're actually doing. You are calling out the unique calling in them and showing it to them. And because you see it and have said it, it actually gives them the courage to believe it might just be true. That's what it means to encourage. And so you have this moment where Jesus dies. A couple days later, he resurrects, and the disciples can't believe it. And Peter's feeling really bad about himself. He's like, man, I blew it. I denied him. I cut off a dude's ear. I can't even stay awake when Jesus is praying. I should be better. Like he's opted himself out from the purpose of God. So what does he do? He returns to what's most familiar to him, and that's fishing. That's what his parents did. So he goes back to fishing, and he's not doing very well when all of a sudden Jesus sees him. And when Jesus sees him, he's like, hey, sees him from the shore, and Peter's out in the boat. And Jesus starts yelling some stuff out. Hey, throw the nets over here. And these guys have been fishing for hours. And when they throw the nets to the side of that Jesus says, and they can't recognize from the distance that it's actually Jesus, well, then all of a sudden this massive haul of fish comes in. And Peter realizes that's Jesus. And he gets out of the boat and he just starts swimming and running towards Jesus. And Jesus is just on the shore and he's just made a fire. He's just made a fire, he's just sitting down, and Peter like runs up to him. And then the other disciples come in and they bring the fish, and Jesus is like, hey, can you make some breakfast? And all of a sudden they're just sitting around a fire having some breakfast. And Jesus does something. In John 21, verse 15, it says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Like, do you love me more than the fish? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. And Jesus says, then feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, then take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And what Jesus was reminding him in this moment, 3 times that Peter had denied him, 3 times that Peter had fallen asleep when Jesus asked him to pray. And in this moment, Jesus is saying, do you love me? For each of those 3 times, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. If you love me, then feed my lambs. If you love me, then take care of my sheep. Remember your unique purpose. And Peter does. And from that moment, Peter becomes wildly different. Acts chapter 2, the Spirit breaks through Pentecost and Peter preaches this massive sermon. In chapter 3, he's healing people. Chapter 4, people are like saying about Peter, this guy's an untrained, unschooled, he's an ordinary guy. But all of the religious leaders are saying, yeah, but that man's been with Jesus. And all of a sudden, the most ordinary, untrained, unschooled man was beginning to trust the divine purpose, and he began to run the unique race that God had set out for him. He didn't run anybody else's race. He didn't let the past define him or cancel out God's purpose. He started to step in, and the church exploded. I say all this because I think some of you in this room, you don't know your divine purpose. You don't know the unique race. And not everyone finds it when they're 15 or 16 or 17. But you gotta stay open. Look for the signs. Look for what makes you angry and what you wanna see different about our world. Look for the unique spiritual gifts or what people say about you. And as you begin to discover that from a posture of pausing and having that posture and entering into the presence of God, God will begin to show you your unique calling. I think that some of you, though, in this room, you know your unique calling. You want to be a teacher, you want to be a business leader, you want to be in ministry, you want to actually create art, you want to invent, you want to be an engineer. You know that, and you know that God wants to use you, but somehow the last few years you've just made some decisions. And those decisions have made you wonder, man, could God actually still use me? And if God could use Peter, and God could use Paul, God could use us no matter what we've done. And I think for some of you, you need tonight to actually ask yourself, is the sin or the lie that someone has spoken into your life louder than the unique calling that God has given to you? But I also think there's a third group of you. And the third group is maybe someone who is like me. Every summer I speak at CIY, and I know this is Unite East, but there's this conference CIY that I speak at twice a year. And the reason is because 30 years ago, when I was 14, I was in one of these auditoriums. And it was the first time that I heard from the Lord about my unique purpose. And I pushed it away. I was like, there's no way God could use me. Like, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I just want to hoop. There's no way. And I made dumb decisions. I tried to push the calling away. And God just kept reminding me. And every year I went to CIY. Boom, boom. It was just this pause, posture, presence. And God kept reminding me of the purpose. And I kept pushing it away until I was 19 years old at a CIY. And all of a sudden, God just got my attention, and the youth pastor was supposed to lead the trip, but he decided not to, and he put me in charge, which was the dumbest decision ever. And 20 dudes all wanted to be in the same dorm room. It smelled terrible, but these guys stayed up all night, and they were asking questions, and I was preaching and speaking, and then one of the students was like, you should do this. I'm like, do what? Like live in a dorm room with 20 guys? He's like, no, man, you should do this. I'm like, do what those guys are doing up there, like that. You should do that. And it was, again, just this reminder. And God was like, if you're not gonna listen to me, then listen to Chris. And I say that because I think some of you in this room, God has whispered a unique purpose to you about ministry. And I just wanna tell you, if that's you, step into it. Don't wait. Be a leader in your youth ministry. Start speaking, start leading worship, start serving in the kids ministry, start serving with junior hires, start helping. Because once you start to kind of fan a flame on that unique gift, that unique purpose, and start running that race, God's gonna be working to prepare your heart, your mind, your body, your soul to actually do the work of a shepherd and pastor. But you have a unique purpose. Don't run anyone else's race. Run your race, amen? Amen. Let me pray over you, and then Sally's gonna come up and lead us in a response time. God, thank you. Thank you for what you are doing at Unite East. I love what you are stirring through the Covenant Church. And I just pray that you would just allow every one of these students, and I think even some leaders maybe who are questioning their unique purpose, to be able to hear what you want for them uniquely. Maybe it's gonna come from a youth leader, maybe it's gonna come from a student, but man, I just pray, maybe it's just gonna come during a worship song, maybe it's just gonna come from your spirit, maybe it's gonna come just on the drive home, but I pray that you would allow my friends to discover that purpose. I pray that whatever lie is holding their life in check and holding them back from doing what they were created to do, I pray that they would surrender those lies and receive your presence, receive your purpose for them. And God, if anybody's wanting to go into ministry, I pray that they would have the courage to share that with the youth leader, sponsor today. It's a brave call. I know that for me, it changed my life. And I just pray that you would just continue to allow my friends here to find and run their unique race. We love you, Lord, and all God's people said, amen. Grace and peace.